All right, welcome to the second sort of major lecture of this week 7 on epistemology, section 2. Today we're going to be discussing the structure of justification, in particular having to do with the infinite regress of justification argument. Hopefully you've read at least most of the Feldman chapter, and here we go. So to begin with, we're kind of assuming that knowledge, the correct analysis of knowledge, is something along the lines of the JTB account plus whatever condition we need to solve for the Gettier examples, right? So assuming that knowledge kind of works like this, at the very least, assuming that knowledge requires both that we believe what we know, that what we know is true, and that what we know is justified, then it seems justification is a really important thing for knowing. So it'd be, worth knowing more about justification, right? Truth is obviously kind of, well, of the three things besides the extra condition for Gettier, that are required for knowledge, justification is kind of the most interesting in a certain way because in a sense we have something like control over it, right? Truth, right, when we're believing things that are true, truth is objective. It's sort of out there in the world. It's the way that things are. We don't really have control over the facts, right? The facts are out there. We're trying to make our beliefs match the facts. Beliefs, similarly, are just sort of, generally they're automatic states that are formed on the basis of our cognitive systems. We come to believe things when, we see stuff out there in the world or when we make inferences. We don't sort of get to choose our beliefs. In a way, there's a difference between the kind of common everyday beliefs I'm talking about here and the kind of beliefs that, come from when you're believing something like in a religious context. But at the very least, for the most part, even for those beliefs, I don't know if you necessarily get to choose that you believe one way or another. But for the common everyday beliefs, right, if you see a computer screen in front of you right now, you come to believe that you have a computer screen in front of you right now. You don't really get a choice in the matter about your beliefs here. And there's not a whole lot you can do, right? Maybe you can force yourself to withhold judgment that you're actually seeing a computer because you think maybe you're in the Matrix or something. But for the most part, these beliefs that you come to have are pretty automatic. Justification, on the other hand, though, is something that we seemingly are able to go out and find. Where it's something that we can dig up, right? Like if you want to, you hear someone say something and you think, oh yeah, okay, I think that's true. But you're not sure, what reasons you have for thinking that it's true. What do? You go to Google, right? You look it up and you find out more about it. You do some research. You come to glean more justification for the belief that you might have. So justification is important and it matters, and so it really kind of matters what justification is and how justification works for any basic account of knowledge. So what is justification? Well, at the very least, there's one commonly held view that what it is to be justified in having a belief is to have some evidence for that belief. In fact, to have enough evidence, right? If for a belief to be justified, one has to have sufficient evidence. So here's a view called evidentialism. Evidentialism is basically a view that when you know something, you have a justified true belief, and what it is for a belief to be justified is for that belief to have sufficient evidence for you. So evidentialism, S is belief, B is justified if and only if S has sufficient evidence that B is true. So here's the basic idea, right? You go through the world seeing things and collecting evidence, and when you collect evidence for one thought or another, your beliefs become more and less justified depending on the sort of balance of evidence as it goes one way or another. So question, what is evidence and what is it to have sufficient evidence? Well, so we can at least put one weak constraint on what it is to have evidence, right? So what it is to have evidence for some proposition, some belief, is to, like, what counts as evidence. Well, anything that supports a proposition, supports that a proposition is true, counts, it seems, as evidence for that proposition, right? So let's give like a really simple basic example. Take proposition P. The proposition P is that snow is white, right? Proposition P, snow is white. And say we have some evidence that snow is white. The evidence that we've got for that snow is white is that we know that snow is the same color as clouds, non-stormy clouds, and we know that non-stormy clouds are white, right? So suppose we've never seen snow, but we believe that snow is the same color as non-stormy clouds. We've seen non-stormy clouds, and we know that non-stormy clouds are white. So that would be, that would be some evidence for the proposition P, that snow is white. We'd have, some connected beliefs, some connected propositions that support that snow is white. They offer support for the proposition. Now, what is it to have sufficient evidence? Well, evidence sometimes can mean two different things, right? Sometimes you have little bits of evidence, and sometimes when we say that when we're talking about someone's evidence, we're talking about the whole totality of the evidence that that person has for some proposition. Sufficient evidence basically just means that you have enough evidence in a certain way, right, to be justified. So if you're going to have sufficient evidence for a proposition P, then you have enough evidence to be justified in believing P. And in a way, what you really need to have sufficient evidence is to have enough evidence for believing P, and make sure that that's not somehow less evidence than you have for believing not P, right? If you somehow have more evidence for believing not P than for believing P, then it seems like you have insufficient evidence, right? So you need to have enough evidence for P, and you need to make sure that you have, um, you know, you don't have enough evidence for not P, and that seems in that kind of case, then um, you would have sufficient evidence, right? So here's an example. We can go kind of both ways on this. Imagine you take three tests to determine whether or not you have COVID-19. You return one positive test, and then you rush out and you get two more tests, and both of those tests turn up negative. Now, what evidence do you have for believing that you have COVID-19? Well, you have the two positive tests, or I mean, the one positive test, right? In a normal context, one positive test for the disease, for the virus, would be sufficient evidence, I would think, to believe that you have the virus, especially if you have some symptoms. Um, Now, we know though that oftentimes these tests go wrong. They're false positives. And so it's a good idea to go and get tested again and again. And so, surely here in this scenario where you get tested three times, it seems like you have insufficient evidence to believe that you have COVID. Not because you have somehow less evidence. You actually have more evidence now in general. You have the same amount of evidence as you initially did for believing that you had COVID, but now you have this extra evidence that is against believing that you have COVID. So it's evidence for not P in this case. So now you come to have insufficient evidence for believing that you have COVID. The other way around, it works as well, right? So when you first get the first test, um, and it tests positive, it seems like you have insufficient evidence for believing that you don't have COVID. But as you get the other tests, it seems that your evidence grows, right? And so you go from being justified in believing that you do have COVID to being justified believing that you don't have COVID, as you end up with one positive test and two negative tests. I mean, this is also because of time. Maybe you tested positive because you did have it, but then the other two tests end up coming up negative because, you beat it or something. But I'm just assuming it in a situation in which you don't actually have it and you get one false positive test. All right, so now getting towards the structure of justification and the infinite regress problem. So suppose you have evidence for proposition P. Remember, proposition P is that snow is white. And your evidence is proposition Q and proposition R. Clouds are white, and clouds and snow have the same color. Now, counter evidence. Sometimes snow looks different from clouds, right? Sometimes snow, I don't know if you've seen snow on the side of the road when it's been scraped off the ground. It definitely isn't always white. It's usually like brown or gray or black. Sometimes, there's also yellow snow. um, Counter evidence. So sometimes snow looks different from clouds. Is that do you though have sufficient evidence for believing that snow is white? Seems so. I mean, like the counter evidence here that sometimes snow looks different from clouds is a small amount. And then also for the most part, most of that evidence seems to be probably caused by other stuff that's in the snow, right? And some, I mean, or the clouds, or like stormy clouds or something like that. Now, problem. You have sufficient evidence for believing P. It seems like P is justified on the basis of Q and R. However, are Q and R justified? Do you have evidence for Q and for R? So, suppose that they're not justified, right? Suppose that the person that is believing P on the basis of Q and R, S, is blind. Then could P actually be justified in this case? If so P believe or S believes P on the basis of Q and R. So Q and R support P, that is Q and R justify P. However, Q and R are not justified, right? If P is supported by Q and R and nothing else, but Q and R aren't supported, how can P actually be supported? That is, if P is supposed to be justified by Q and R, but Q and R aren't justified at all, how can we say that P is justified? Suppose instead then that S does have justification for Q and R, right? So someone A has told S that snow is the same color as clouds and that clouds are white, so Q and R are justified, right? So this other person has told S is this blind person still, right? So our Q and R are justified, but what is it that they're justified by? Well, maybe this further proposition, right? Z. And Z is the proposition that things that person A says are trustworthy. So on the basis of believing Z and the fact that A told person S that Q and R are true, then it seems like we can get this situation where P is justified by Q and R, right? And Q and R is justified by Z. So, person S's belief that P is, their belief that snow is white is justified by their belief that Q and R, their belief that snow is the same color as clouds and that clouds are white. And then their belief that snow is the same color as clouds and that clouds are white is justified by Z, their belief that things that person A says are trustworthy and the fact that person A told them that Q and R. Question now, what supports Z? What supports proposition Z? Like, don't we need further justification for Z? Why should we think that things person A says are trustworthy? Isn't there going to be, there needs to be something further here in order to justify P. We need Z to be justified in order for that to justify Q and R, in order for that to justify P. But how are we going to get Z justified? So can we justify Z with further propositions, maybe? Let's just, so let's say like, person A has been trustworthy in what they said in the past. I've experienced them, doing trustworthy things in the past. Or maybe like, person B told me that person A was trustworthy, right? And so now I have, another person. This isn't going to help, right? Giving another reason to justify proposition Z, giving more justification. Well, whatever we do, we're going to have to give a further proposition to justify whatever proposition we have. And then we're going to be stuck trying to give another justification for that proposition, right? And then we're going to continue. It's just going to go on and on and on. We're always going to be asking, well, what justifies this next proposition? Basically, what we have here is called an infinite regress. It's an infinite regress argument against the possibility of justification. And the problem here is that it seems like whenever you justify some proposition on the basis of some other proposition, whenever you have evidence for one proposition, um, the underlying evidence, the underlying justifier, needs itself to be justified. And then the question is, well, what justifies it? And anything you seemingly go to, well, that thing also needs to be justified, and so on down the regress. The problem is nothing ever gets justified. Now, what are the answers to this regress? Well, there are three, or really four, three that are interesting. Um, One, you can accept the regress, and this view is called infinitism. And the idea is that, yeah, justification does happen, but it's got this infinite structure. You can always give justification for any proposition all the way down. Two, justification bottoms out in some way. It bottoms out in some foundation. It bottoms out at some basic level where there are basic beliefs that are basically justified, and they're fundamental for all of the other justifications that we have. The third option is called coherentism, and this idea is that justification actually loops in some way. That is, justification works kind of like in a circle, or like a web. That is, depending on how coherent an entire system of beliefs are, each belief within the system receives some form of justification on the whole. Or you can go in for skepticism and reject the whole thing, ultimately saying, like, look, because justification goes on forever in this way, we have an infinite regress that is a vicious regress. And because it's a vicious regress, we shouldn't believe that we're ever justified. All right, option one, infinitism. So what does infinitism say? Basically, infinitism says this: for any proposition that you have justified, you can accept that justification can just kind of always go on forever. So proposition P is justified by proposition Q and R, and proposition Q and R is justified by proposition Z, and proposition Z is justified by proposition, A, proposition B, like, and so on and so forth. The idea there being that there can always be another reason found to justify any given belief that one has. So anytime one offers something like a justificatory remark for some other remark, anytime one has evidence acting as justification for some proposition that one believes, there can always be further evidence found, or another reason found to justify the original evidence. Now, there's a problem with infinitism. The problem is that no one has an infinite number of beliefs, right? I mean, it's really hard to kind of count up all your beliefs, right? But you are a human being, and you have a finite mind, right? You're not a god. You can't think an infinite number of thoughts, and that seems to restrict the number of beliefs that you can have, right? All of the beliefs that you can have are, at the very least, all of the thoughts that you can have. And so if you have a finite number of thoughts, then you have a finite number of beliefs. Now, why is that a problem? Well, if you need to believe something, if you need to have a belief uh, in order to justify your other beliefs, that is, if you need to believe a proposition, believe some evidence, and believe that that evidence justifies one of your other beliefs in order for that belief to count as justified, then infinitism just seems like an impossible case for how justification is going to work, right? It seems like, we do have some bits of knowledge, and those bits of knowledge are justified, and those bits of knowledge, are based, the justification for those bits of knowledge is some evidence that we have. But if that evidence then, needs to be justified on the basis of some other belief that we have, and then that belief needs to be justified, and then it ends up going on for infinity, well, it just looks like we don't have any real place to start the chain of justification. the chain of justification sort of just doesn't seem to ever get off the ground because we don't have an infinite number of beliefs that are justified. So it seems like it's a pretty big problem for infinitism. It seems like it's just not possible to get justification off the ground on the infinitist line of solving the infinite regress problem. How about foundationalism? So foundationalism is the option of denying that there is a bottom to that there is no bottom to justification. So basically, what happens here? The foundationalist says, "Look, justification does bottom out. There are these things; they're fundamentally justified. There are fundamentally justified basic beliefs." Um, There's a couple of ways to go here. Either you can say, look, they're just bottom level beliefs, and those beliefs are fundamentally justified just in and of themselves in some way. Or you can say, well, there are these bottom level basic beliefs, and the bottom level basic beliefs are justified, but they're justified by things that aren't beliefs. They're justified by other kinds of things, like, by God or by our experiences or something like that. Now, there's some problems here with foundationalism, and foundationalism is probably the most widely held view in philosophy with regard to justification, but we'll talk about it more, right? First, it seems somewhat arbitrary to say that some set of beliefs are the ones that are fundamentally justified, while others aren't, right? Um, you need to give some reason for thinking that certain beliefs are the basic ones, certain beliefs are fundamentally justified, and saying that the other ones are based on those fundamental beliefs. You got to do that. Otherwise, your theory of foundationalism is just not going to get off the ground. But then, isn't that reason that you're going to give for dividing basic beliefs and non-basic beliefs just going to be giving more of a justification for what those fundamentally basic beliefs are, like, and how they're justified? I mean, we'll see this later, but if you divide beliefs into the basic beliefs and then the non-basic beliefs, right? The beliefs that are known on the basis of the basic beliefs. And then you have to explain why the basic beliefs are basic. Well, it looks like now you're giving an explanation, a justification for the basic beliefs. But wait a minute, if the basic beliefs are basic, then they're not supposed to be justified on the basis of some further beliefs. They're the basic ones. They're the ones that are fundamentally justified and start the kind of foundation of all the rest of knowledge. So it seems like we're gonna get trapped here again in the regress. If you say that there are unjustified justifiers, that is things that justify basic beliefs, but aren't themselves justified, then you need to tell a story about how they justify and how they are in a good position to do so. But in the end, this is gonna seem like magic if it doesn't push you right back into the regress. Third option, coherentism. Coherentism is an interesting view because it kind of denies that beliefs are justified on the basis of individual other beliefs. Basically, what coherentism says is that when we're talking about justification, we shouldn't be talking about it as if, individual beliefs are justified or unjustified by other beliefs. It's not like when a belief is true or false, right? When a belief is true, there's like one fact out there in the world that the belief is true in virtue of, right? A belief, like the belief that snow is white, is true because there's the fact out there in the world that snow is white. There's this one-to-one correspondence relationship that holds between the belief and the fact. But justification isn't like that. Justification is a global property of all of your beliefs at once, your entire cognitive state, your whole mind all at one time. Justification is what happens when all of your beliefs kind of work together in a coherent picture, right? The idea here being that you don't have any beliefs that are in sort of conflict with one another. You don't have beliefs like that snow is white and that snow is not white at the same time, right? You don't want those. If you had those two beliefs at the same time, your whole picture, your whole belief state would not be coherent because you would believe a contradiction, right? And so this is the general idea here, is that really when it comes what any particular belief that is justified, it's justified because it coheres with the entire system of beliefs that you have. So you believe that snow is white. How is that justified? Well, it's justified on the basis of the fact that, you were told that snow is white, that you believe that snow is the same color as clouds, that clouds are white. You've seen these things. You believe that your visual system is accurate. Like all of these things taken together, right? You believe that there's no evil demon that's fooling you. All of these things taken together kind of combine into this whole coherent picture of how things are. And justification for any individual property or any individual belief that you have kind of comes out of the whole picture. So justification in this sense is somehow like web-like or circular. That is, like, different beliefs can justify, in a sense, can help justify themselves. Like, think about your belief that your perceptual system, the your eyes, believe. How do you know that you can trust your eyes, right? How do you know that you can trust what you see? Well, one way in which you can trust what you see is that you use your eyes to see that you are seeing well, right? Like, here's the idea: you see other people seeing, or you run experiments on your own vision. Well, in running experiments on your own vision, you are using your vision in order to test your vision. Well, that seems like, a circular form of reasoning. And the coherentist says, yeah, and that's okay. Because, we're not, circular reasoning is bad when there's one thing that you're basing justification on, right? If there's one belief that's justifying another belief, and then that belief then goes back to justify the first belief, that's a problem, right? We don't want circular reasoning, but what we are okay with is mutual justification. That is justification that kind of goes two ways. So my belief that what I'm seeing can be justified by my belief that my visual system is accurate, and my belief that my visual system is accurate can be justified on the on my belief about what I'm seeing, right? Especially when I'm doing experiments on my visual system and testing it for accuracy. Problems with coherentism. There's lots of problems with coherentism, and two of the major problems, probably the biggest ones. One is called the alternative systems objection, and the other one is called the isolation objection. The alternative systems objection is somewhat damning. Here's the way it goes: if we accept the correspondence theory of truth, that is, if we accept that truth is objective, then we accept that really, in the end, there's just one way that the whole world actually is. There's one way that everything is out there in the world. There's one set of facts that determine how reality stands. And it seems like when we're trying to be justified in our beliefs, we're trying to get at the truth of the matter. If we're trying to get at the truth of the matter, and justification is trying to get us at having an accurate picture of how the world is, well, there's a problem here, because on a coherentist view, we could imagine different whole different global sets of beliefs that are equally coherent, and yet one of them, is false and the other one is true. That would mean in the end that these equally coherent sets of beliefs are equally justified, because coherence is justification, but one could be much less true than the other. So here's a good way, I think, of thinking about this, right? Um, I don't know if any of you are religious in any way, or if any of you have heard about this. You can take this semi-seriously. You might not, you might or you might not. Now imagine that the Christian worldview is in some sense correct, that there is a God, that he is the Christian God, that Jesus died for your sins, all that jazz. Now, think about the different sects of Christianity, right? The different sects of Christianity. You've got like evangelicals on one side, you've got the Protestants, you've got the Anglicans, you've got the Catholics. Now, just take, the two very different views. We've got the Catholics on one side and we've got the evangelicals on the other side. And imagine both of them have equally coherent pictures of how the world is, right? They each have equally coherent pictures of how the world is, and so they are equally justified in holding the beliefs that they have. However, they have different beliefs, right? Generally, one group, I think the Catholics believe in things like childhood baptism. They think that you should baptize your babies. Whereas evangelicals tend to not think that. They tend to think, no, you shouldn't baptize babies. Well, if the Christian worldview is correct, then God thinks yes, you should baptize babies, or no, you shouldn't baptize babies, right? One way or another. He thinks that's a fact of the matter. It's one way or the other. But it's funny here. If both views are equally coherent, then both views are equally justified, and that seems problematic if one view is totally off base with the facts. So the alternative systems view, again, the alternative systems objection to coherentism states that there are lots of different systems of belief that are equally coherent, and it just doesn't seem like we should think of them all as equally justified, because justification is supposed to be getting us at the truth. And in this case, it just seems like there's going to be some very coherent set of beliefs that just is far from the truth. All right. Second problem with coherentism is the isolation objection. And this is really straightforward. Imagine you have a system of beliefs that are totally coherent, but totally not connected to the world, right? Imagine, you're like a hermit or something, and you go off into the woods and you build this fantastical, model of how the society is running outside of the woods, right? You have this hugely coherent, fantastical fantasy story that you start to believe, right, about how, Donald Trump is the president. How crazy would that be? That guy from the TV show years ago, and he's terribly leading an entire group of people through a pandemic. In fact, he gets sick himself. No, I mean I'm just joking, right? But imagine, right? You've got a hermit out in the woods that comes up with a fantastical theory of how things are, but he's totally in isolation from reality. And so in the end, he has a fully coherent set of beliefs, fully coherent, right? There's no contradictions to his beliefs. However, his beliefs are in total isolation from reality. So it seems weird in this case for his set of beliefs to be justified, given that they're coherent when they're in isolation. So when they're in isolation from reality, it seems like we need some connection to reality to ground the justification of the beliefs before we even start thinking about coherence. So this is kind of a common thread in criticisms of coherentism. It's the idea that in the end, coherence is a feature of justification. It's great when your beliefs are coherent and when they fit well together with each other, but you need some strand, you need some string, you need something that grounds your beliefs in reality before you worry about coherence. All right. Finally, uh, beyond coherentism, which has its own problems, we have the fourth option, which is skepticism. And skepticism, in the skeptical scenario, you deny that justification never really happens, and you say, no, it just can't get started, right? We never actually have any justification for our beliefs because justification can't get started on the basis of this infinite regress argument. And then you accept that we don't know anything, or and kind of reject that we need justification I mean, or you say, actually, no, the regress argument works. And so I'm skeptical about justification, but you might think, actually, we do really know stuff. We just don't need justification for it, right? You say the JTB analysis is actually wrong and justification is out. Now, this presupposes that what we have when we're worried about the regress argument is a vicious regress rather than an innocent one. And what's the difference between a vicious regress and an innocent one? This is interesting, I think, because regress arguments get used all over the place in philosophy, and so it's worth knowing the difference. Some regress arguments are okay, and some of them aren't. An innocent regress would be a kind of regress that happens, but really just isn't a problem, right? So here, take this example of a regress. Suppose I know that I believe that snow is white, P. Well, then I believe that snow is white, right? So if I know that I believe that snow is white, then I believe that snow is white, right? So if I know that I believe P, then I believe P. And then I can believe that I believe P. And then further, I can believe that I believe that I believe P. And then further, I can believe that I believe that I believe that I believe P, right? And so on and so forth. This is in a sense a regress of believing that could go on for in infinity. It's an infinite regress, right, of beliefs. But there's no problem here, right? Just because I know that I believe something, and that leads to this believing that I can believe that I believe that I believe, we don't get some issue. That doesn't change the fact that I know that I believe P, and that on the basis of that, then I believe P. With respect to a vicious regress, the problem is this. It's like, so take something that you want to be the case, A. Well, a vicious regress works like this. In order for A to be the case, then B also has to be the case, right? But in order for B to be the case, some further condition C must be the case, and then we keep going, right? In order for C to be the case, then D must be the case. In order for D to be the case, then E must be the case, and then there's never any stopping, right? And so because there's never any stopping, we can't ever get A to be the case, because in order for A to be the case, B has to be the case, C has to be the case, E has to be the case, D has to be the case. And we never get a spot where we're like, well, and guess what? Z is the case. Z is the case. And so we can go back through, right? We got Z is the case. So Y is the case. So W, and then all the way back up to A, right? No, a vicious regress is when there's like no stopping point and it just doesn't look like it's ever going to stop. So in this case, yeah, when we're talking about justification, the regress of justification is a problem, because it seems like we need our, every justifying belief, every belief that is being used to justify some other belief, we need that belief to be justified itself before it can actually confer justification. All right, now here is a commonly used regress argument for foundationalism, and this is in the book, in the chapter. So basically, this argument goes. I mean, foundationalism is the view that most people probably hold to these days, and so here's kind of an argument for it. Right? Either there are justified basic beliefs, or each justified belief has an evidential chain that either A terminates in an unjustified belief, B is an infinite regress of beliefs, or C is circular. Premise 2, beliefs based on unjustified beliefs are not themselves justified. So no justified belief could have an evidential chain that terminates in an unjustified belief. That is, it's not the case that A. That seems right, right? If you have a belief that's justified on the basis of some unjustified belief, well, then really you can't, that justification of the first belief can't be, right? You can't have a justified belief justified on the basis of some belief that is unjustified itself. That other unjustified belief needs to be justified before it can confer any justification on any beliefs above it or that it supports. All right. Premise 3. No person could have an infinite series of beliefs, so no justified belief could have an evidential chain that is an infinite regress of beliefs. That is not B, right? So not infinitism, because it's not possible for anyone to have an infinite number of beliefs. Premise 4. No belief could be justified by itself, and so no justified belief could have an evidential chain that is circular. This is to rule out the possibility of coherentism. The idea here is to say, look, coherentism says that it's possible for a belief to self-justify, basically, or to be for circular reasoning to be okay. And so that's a problem. That's not something that's okay. And so not C. Therefore, we're stuck back with going with the first part of one. If it's not A, B, or C, then it's got to be the case that there are justified basic beliefs. So foundationalism, this argument is sound. If the argument is sound, then there are justified basic beliefs, and they're the foundation upon which all of our other justified beliefs rest. Right? Um, that's the view, right? Foundationalism says this is a good argument, and so there are justified basic beliefs. The view coherentism says, no, actually, the argument goes wrong with premise 1.4. Justification for one proposition can be another, which is itself justified by still more. And more generally, a person's belief is justified when it fits together with a person's other beliefs in a whole coherent way. A belief is thus justified by a whole system of which it's part, hence a belief is partially justified by itself, and so 1.4 is false. Premise 4 is false. Infinitism would say, no, the argument goes wrong at premise 3. There is an infinite regress of justification that's possible. And then skepticism would say, well, because neither foundationalism nor coherentism is at all plausible, or nor infinitism, there is no other place at which the argument goes wrong. And so basically, in the end, we just can't be justified by any of our beliefs. So these are, again, the 4 options related to the argument here, the infinite regress argument for foundationalism. I'm going to go with guessing that foundationalism and coherentism are kind of the most plausible views here, because we do have justification, unless you're a full-blown skeptic. Now, there are 2 kinds of foundationalism. Foundationalism tends to be the thing that people take to be the most plausible, and so let's think about 2 different kinds of foundationalism. Basically, the most interesting thing about foundationalism, sort of the trick, the thing to do in foundationalism, is to specify what the basic beliefs are, the things that are justified on the basis of something other than beliefs, right? So you get these basic beliefs that are justified in some way. They're not unjustified beliefs, they're just justified in some other way. And then they confer justification on other beliefs, but they themselves aren't justified by beliefs. So Cartesian foundationalism is the first one. And that's, remember back to Descartes. And Descartes, the sort of thing that we thought about with him, I think, therefore I am, right? Descartes realizes that even if he's being fooled by an evil demon, he's doubting his own perceptions, and he can't doubt that he's a thinking thing, right? He can't doubt that he's doubting, because that would be dumb. Like, that just isn't something you can do. If you doubt that you're doubting, and so you're not doubting that you're doubting, right? Because that's what you're doing. Now, Descartes basically thinks, okay, so in order to build up a theory of knowledge, we need some foundations. And he wants his foundations to be solid. So he thinks of the foundations as both needing to be indubitable, that is, unable to be doubted, and infallible, that is, beliefs that we can't really be mistaken about. Beliefs that we can't, beliefs that, like I think, therefore I am. You can't be mistaken about that, right? If you're thinking, then you exist. Something that is totally infallible with respect to. So Descartes basically says, okay, well, what the foundational beliefs are that we're going to postulate, they're going to be beliefs about our internal states. They're going to be beliefs about things like the fact that I'm doubting right now, or the fact that I'm thinking. Um, and so basically, these internal states are going to be the seemings, the way that things seem to me. It seems to me that things are thus and so, and you can't really be wrong about how things seem to you, right? So take this example right now. You know, even if you are a brain in a vat, or even if you are being fooled by an evil demon, it seems to you right now as if you're looking at a computer screen, or listening to my voice, or looking at your phone, whatever it is, however it is that you're taking up on this lecture. It seems to you that way. And nothing that a evil demon can do, or a brain in a vat person, a brain in a vat computer can do, is going to change the way that it seems, right? That's just how it is. So it seems like you can't doubt that that's how it seems to you. And it seems like you're infallible, right? You can't be mistaken about how things seem to you. Thus, it seems like, the way that it seems is the way that things seem are pretty good, is a pretty good foundation for your foundational beliefs, right? It's a pretty good foundation for your basic beliefs. The way that things seem, these internal beliefs that you have, these beliefs about your internal states, they are just justified on the basis of the fact that they're how things seem. Now, if you take that seeming, the way things seem, plus another belief that how things seem usually matches with how things are, then we can deduce from that my belief that there is a computer in front of me, right? Your belief that you are listening to my voice. We can go from the fact that it seems to you that you're listening to my voice, plus the fact that usually how things seem is how things matches with how things are. I mean, sometimes it doesn't, but for the most part, from that, then we can get to the belief that there is a computer in front of me, that you are listening to my voice, so on and so forth, right? And there we have it, right? We have the everyday regular beliefs, like my belief that I'm looking at a computer screen right now is justified on the basis of my basic belief that it seems to me like I'm looking at a computer screen right now. Great. There are problems for Cartesian foundationalism, a few of them. First, Descartes thought that it was possible for us, or that it was not possible for us to be wrong about our own seemings, how things seem to us, but that just doesn't seem right. It's totally possible for us to be wrong about our own seemings. Like, sometimes it seems to me that I am in pain, but then I actually, it turns out, find the feeling to not be pain, but to be something like an itch, right? I'm uncomfortable and I think, oh, my back is giving out, and actually it's like, oh no, it's just I needed to move in a certain way, and some muscle popped, or something happened like that, right? uh, the way that the way that things seem to me turned out to not be how they actually seemed to me, right? It seemed to me to be one way at first, and then it turned out to not actually seem that way. So sometimes our seemings, it seems like we can be mistaken about them. Um, you can I think the example they give in the book is like, imagine you fall and like put your hand right on top of a frying pan, and it seems to you that you're like, burning sensation. You pull your hand off the frying pan and then you realize, oh, I didn't get burned at all, right? um, so if it's possible for our seeming states to be mistaken, then they're not infallible. And so really then they just don't seem like the kinds of things that Descartes is on about as good candidates for basic beliefs. Second problem for Cartesian foundationalism is that we generally don't have very many beliefs about how things seem to us. Like, we don't really go around in our daily lives thinking, You know what it seems to me like? It seems like I'm driving right now. It seems like the road is over there and that it seems like there's a car next to me. I guess I should believe that there's a car next to me on the basis of that seeming. No, we don't think about our internal states like that. We just come to have beliefs about how things are out in the world, right? We don't try to justify our belief while driving that there's a car next to us on the basis of how things seem to us. We just see the car next to us and come to believe that there's a car next to us and then act accordingly. So it's weird in a certain way to think that there are these foundational beliefs that we can come to when we, do a lot of work. We can like recognize, oh, I believe that there's a car next to me. I wonder why that is or how that's justified. And then like realize, oh, well, it seems like there's a car next to me, and I believe that it seems like there's a car next to me. Well, that is how we could reason in a way, I guess. But normally, it seems like when you see a car next to you while you're driving, you're justified in believing that there's a car next to you while you're driving, even before you've thought about whether or not it seems to you like there's a car next to you when you're driving. So the seeming beliefs seem to be bad candidates for foundational beliefs. A view that is much more widely held nowadays, is what we will call modest foundationalism. And modest foundationalism is a form of foundationalism that accepts that it's possible for you to be mistaken. Modest foundationalism basically says, look, we do have basic beliefs, and basic beliefs, like a lot of our basic beliefs, are caused by our sensory experiences. And these basic beliefs are foundational and justified. They're justified on the basis of our sensory experiences. Sensory experiences are not beliefs, but sensory experiences do confer justification onto the beliefs that we have about what it is that we're experiencing out in the world. So if I see my hand, I'm having a sensory experience of my hand, and then I come to believe that that's my hand. Well, that belief is basic and justified, right? The belief just kind of is generated on the basis of how my brain works when I see my hand, right? I didn't reason to thinking that this is my hand. I just saw it and then I came to believe it. And it seems like the experience, whatever's going on there, is somehow uh causing me to believe it and causing me to believe it well, right? Like it's doing a good job. My experience is matching up with the world, I think. And so if my experience is matching up with the world, then it seems like my experience can somehow confer justification onto my belief about how the world is. So modest foundationalism takes, at the very least, sensory experience based beliefs to be basic and foundational, and then thinks that those beliefs are justified on, the reliability of our experiences, our perceptual systems, right? So, because our perceptual systems work in the way that they do, our basic beliefs are justified. Now, we're still fallible. That is, these beliefs can be wrong. We can have illusions, we can have hallucinations, we can get things wrong pretty consistently, but they're not wrong most of the time, right? And that, so the idea here is like, look, it's possible that sometimes we're totally wrong and we totally get things wrong, and sometimes we don't know, right? Sometimes when we see illusions, when we see like mirages, um, we don't know that the thing that we saw is actually there, right? That's the basis of a problematic sensory experience that causes us to believe things that are false. And then the idea is that from there, from these basic beliefs, we can use induction. We can use induction and make inductive generalizations to believe things that are much more high level, right? So we've got our basic sensory beliefs, like this is a hand, that I'm looking at a computer right now, that the color of the apple is red, and then from there we can infer to higher level beliefs, right? Like that the apple is ripe now, right? That my hand is made of flesh and bone. That my computer is, black and white in certain places and made of plastic and metal. All right. Are there problems with modest foundationalism? There are, but these are more iffy problems, right? So, modest foundationalism tends to be something that people like. It's a really sort of plausible view. It's really kind of simple, and it matches up with a lot of like science and stuff. But here's some problems. Look, you might think like, are there really two different kinds of justification? That is like normal justification that happens from beliefs to other beliefs. And then also this like magical kind of justification that happens between sensory experiences and beliefs. Like, why should we think that there's these two different kinds of justification? Like, I thought we were just worried about justification. Isn't there just this one thing that we're worried about? Now we have to explain two totally different kinds of things. And I understand how the first one works, right? I understand how it is that my belief that snow is white can be justified on the basis of my other beliefs that, clouds are white and that snow has the same color as clouds, right? I understand how those two beliefs confer justification on my other belief that snow is white. What I don't understand at all is how experiencing snow and experiencing the whiteness of snow somehow confers justification on my belief that snow is white, right? I mean, I just don't get it. That's not a story that I understand. It's not something that I see in the same way that I see it when I see, some evidential beliefs conferring justification on some belief that needs justification. Um, Similarly, it seems like basic beliefs are still justifiable in certain ways. And here's what I mean. When we're talking about which beliefs are basic, it seems like we have to give a story that justifies those beliefs. Like, if these beliefs are basic, then these beliefs are justified beliefs that aren't justified by other beliefs. But if I have to give you a story about how these beliefs are justified, then it seems like that story involves a bunch of beliefs that I have. And if that story involves a bunch of beliefs that I have, then it looks like I'm using some other beliefs that I have that are justified to try and justify, why these basic beliefs are basic and are justified. So like, it looks like here's the story, right? In order to talk about how my basic beliefs are justified on the basis of experience, I have to tell you and explain to you how it is that experience is a good candidate, is a reliable thing for justifying my basic beliefs. What reason do I have for believing that experience is a reliable thing for justifying my basic beliefs? Well, I have more beliefs. I have my beliefs about how accurate my experiences are. So now we've got these other beliefs, it looks like, sneaking in to the story about how justification works at the basic level. And now I'm really not sure anymore whether or not these things count as basic beliefs because, they're just being justified from a different perspective. All right, are there some conclusions we can draw? And this is, this is the end of this lecture. There's this analogy that this one guy, I think his name is Otto von Neurath, once put, um, that like, when it comes to knowledge, there's two general pictures that people take. There's the building of a house picture, and then there's the raft picture. The building of a house picture is akin to foundationalism. And foundationalism kind of is like how we build up scientific knowledge, right? What happens oftentimes in science is we find some underlying principles that seem really solid. Like, in physics, we've got like, we had Newton's laws. Now we have all of the theories of general relativity. And we find those to be pretty solid. And then we build theories around them, right? So we take these like foundational core pieces of knowledge at the bottom of these scientific theories and then build more knowledge on top of it. And so that kind of does work in a foundationalisty type of way. But most everyday knowledge that we have doesn't come that way. It comes more along the lines of floating on a raft. Von Neurath basically put it this way. Um, Look, like, think about how it is that you know stuff. You do know a lot of things, but what is all that knowledge based on? Well, it's based on this like lattice of structures that you're kind of floating through the world on. And when you come to learn something new, you replace parts of the raft that you're floating on, and you're replacing, basically fixing up the raft that you're floating on while you're floating on it. You're not somehow like standing apart from your raft fixing it, right? You're not on the shore standing on steady foundations of things that you know for sure while you're fixing your raft. No, you're on your raft, living your life, floating through reality, trying to come to know things on the basis of what it is that you already know. And so, in a way, all of the things that you know kind of are, confer the justification onto other things that you believe in this way that allows you to kind of keep moving on, moving through your life as you're going. And so, in conclusion, I just want to sort of say this. Um, I think foundationalism is a fine view, but it seems a lot more likely in some ways to think that really the way that we take each other to be justified in all of our thinking is in some ways more coherentist. Our basic ways of thinking are much more like a raft, I think, than like the building of a building, and that's just sort of from my own perspective, I guess. So um, maybe in science we really do ideally build knowledge on solid foundations. But in reality, when it comes to our everyday beliefs, I think we have some core beliefs that are the main support beams for the raft that we're floating on, and then we have orthogonal beliefs that are the side bits of the raft that don't maybe matter as much, can be replaced more easily. But really, in the end, we're floating on a raft of our own knowledge, and we don't have any way to sort of step away from the raft and uh, inspect it for holes or anything like that, right? We're stuck in the raft, thinking with the knowledge that we have, and using our own other knowledge that we already have to check whether or not our beliefs are coherent and fit with one another. All right. I hope that that was interesting for you. That's the end of this week. And for next week, we'll be discussing um, sort of we're gonna get into another issue in the structure of justification, particularly in epistemology. These are theories that are called internalist and externalist theories of knowledge and justification. And then we're going to start shifting gears towards metaphysics. But first, what we're going to be thinking through is kind of like theories of how it is that we know about the fundamental structure of reality, and whether or not we know about the fundamental structure of reality at all. And we're going to look. I mean, at least I'm going to talk. If I don't actually assign any readings along these lines, we're going to look at some people like David Hume, and we're going to look at Immanuel Kant again. All right. Have a nice rest of your week.